So it just ain't gonna, there it goes. Hey, that one's it. I was told this morning that the reason why this mic's having so much trouble is because of my beard. And so I thought tonight, but I didn't have time this afternoon, I was just going to shave the left side of my face. just for fun, you know. And then I was also told that it was because I've gotten so fat that my belly's hanging over my belt and it's messing it up on my belt. So I got it in my coat pocket tonight. So if it works well, then we'll know I got it up in my eyeball and in my coat pocket. So you know, with friends like Richard Bivens, I don't need any enemies. You know what I mean? He's probably right? It is probably pushing on the belt a little there. But anyway, it ain't none of his business. But we've been talking about vision. We've been talking about being able to see others. Last Sunday night we talked about feelings, being able to see other people's feelings. That's a very challenging thing. Feelings are not wrong. Feelings are natural to all of us. All of us have them, and how we deal with them and how we approach them and how we accept others and help others to work through feelings is very important to the betterment of the Lord's church. Tonight we want to continue that thought, and if you have your Bibles, you can be opening them to Philippians chapter 2 as we think about others and our vision for others as it relates to needs. Not just feelings, but then needs. You know, it ought to be a real joy in life to help other people. It ought to be. It ought to be a real encouraging and uplifting thing to know that you are using your life and your resources for the betterment of someone else. Now that's not human. It's not society. It's not culture. It's not biological. It's going to be counter to all of that. It is Christianity, though. And it is the way that God has called us to live. And so as we continue to develop this vision that is a little narrow-minded at this point, and just thinking about one another, tonight let's think about needs. Before we get to Philippians 2, I want you to think with me in general just a moment about what needs look like. I was reading an article and it suggested that there are 4 types of needs within the church. First type is informational need. In other words, that's just facts and information. In other words, my friend Joshua here has learned a lot in the last few months about how all of y'all are kin to each other, right? So don't talk about anybody, right? Because you're talking to their cousin, right? It's the same way in Mississippi where he grew up, but nonetheless, he don't know your connections, right? You see, there's a need for facts. There's a need for information just on a general level, just to know who you are and you to know who I am and just general information about one another's lives. There's needs for that. Well, this person is now a widow or a widower, and they buried their spouse 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Those are just informational facts about life. And there are needs in that category that it helps us to have that information. As you go from there, and that's just a basic generic starting, as you go from there, then you get into some physical needs. These are obviously the things of life. So what are some physical needs that a person might have? It may be because the information that you gain about that person would tell you that they had a stroke 5 years ago. And based on the knowledge of that information, there may be some handicap for that person that would require some physical needs for them. Maybe it's helping them to and from the car, or maybe it's going over to the house and doing something that they're not physically capable of doing to help them out. It's just physical needs to help them carry on with life. Then from there it gets a little deeper. It gets into psychological needs. Ooh. I'm pretty good about information. I like to talk to people and I like to ask questions. So I can find out facts and information and I enjoy, I'll find out what the name of your dog is and how many cows you have. And I can talk like that all day. Physical needs, well, those are pretty easy, right? If you need a loaf of bread, I'll go buy you a loaf of bread. No big deal, right? Everybody's got a need to eat, so you need to eat, I'll help you with that. If you need help in and out of the car, no big deal. I'll bring the wheelchair, the walker. Doesn't take a lot of effort. Just have to kind of be attentive to what's going on around you and maybe ask a few questions. But now this third level is much more difficult. Because now we're into kind of what we was talking about last week with feelings, but these psychological needs involve emotions, for some people it involves medically diagnosed issues, meaning things like depression, meaning things like arthritis, meaning things like blindness, meaning things like you just carry on with the list. And so these things that deal with our psyche, there's needs that come in there, and I'm going to have to get past what your dog's name is and how many cows you have to learn your psyche, to learn what challenges you emotionally, what bothers you psychologically. And the reality of it is that when you get to this level, oftentimes there's somebody else needed. Meaning there's someone that is trained and taught and educated, a psychologist, a counselor, to help with. I may not be able to address psychological needs. I can help you identify them. I can be a support and a shoulder, but I may not be qualified to help you with psychological needs. And then the fourth area and the deepest level is what was called in this article root needs. Went on to define them as real needs. Now, the first thought you would have is, okay, so we can't go there, but yeah, we can go there. Because here's often what happens. In this article it illustrated that. Here's what happens. A person comes in to the church and they say, you know what? I need help paying my power bill. And you know what we do as a church? We often help them pay their power bill. You know what the problem is often? It's not that the power is going to be turned off. The problem, the root problem, the real problem is money management. That's the real problem. That's the root problem. But you see, you got to get involved to get to the root. You got to get involved to get to the real. You got to spend some time and some effort. So, whatever the problem might be, and oftentimes we do needs like this. What are your needs? Well, I've just got some needs at home. Okay, and we just leave it at that. Because homes are about lives and marriages and children, and it just gets messy, right? So I really don't want to go any further than that. I tell you what, I'll pray for your home. How about that? The root problem, the real problem is selfishness. The real problem is greed. The real problem is lack of communication. The real problem is lack of God as a priority. You see, those are real problems. Those are real needs that need to be addressed. But oftentimes we just genericize them. That's not a word, but it works. To the point that I don't want you to ask me no more questions. See, I just want to make it real generic and real kind of run-of-the-mill so that you don't get too involved here. And so here's what I'm really thinking tonight, is that as much as we need informational needs filled, and as much as we need physical needs filled, I really am thinking we need a vision that addresses root, real needs. And some of those may be psychological in nature, meaning grief, meaning sorrow, meaning bitterness, meaning resentment, all of those dealing with psychological things. But a vision that is deeper, that is more involved than just, you realize that when you ask people what you can do for them, I still do it all the time. You know that, right? Is there anything I can do for you? Well, do you realize that everybody in this building has just enough pride to say no? We've all got just enough pride to say no. No, there's not anything you can do for me. When really there may be something. So I want us to think about a vision that quits asking that question and starts working on some how-to stuff to do a little differently. And it's all laid out in Philippians 2, isn't it? In verse 3, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourself. That's not the way we were born into this world, is it? That's not the way that our culture suggests we ought to live. It's not the way that your work environment says, hey, you know what? If you really want to be a good employee, you need to look out for the betterment of everybody else. No, your work environment says, hey, you better take care of number one, right? The school you go to says, hey, ain't nobody around here got your back. You better have your own back. The culture, the society in which we live says, hey, if you want it, go get it. If you ain't happy, go do what'll make you happy. If you don't like it, trade it in for something else. It's all about what I want, what makes me happy, what I think will bring fulfillment in my life. So it's all about me. The Bible says, count others more significant than yourself. And he goes on in verse 4 and says, look each of you not only to your own interest, but also, and if I could change the word interest to needs of others. Look only not at your own needs, but look for opportunities, Galatians 6 and verse 10, as you have opportunity, do good unto all. Look for the needs of others. How are we going to do that? Verse 5, you got to get the mind of Jesus, who did what? Verse 6, he had equality with God, but he didn't focus on himself. He didn't focus on what was best for him, what was best for Jesus. The best thing for Jesus was to stay in heaven. I mean, after all, when I get there, I ain't going to want to go nowhere else. How about you? And he was there, right? So why would he want to go anywhere else? He was with God. He was in that spiritual realm, now existing and abiding in the place we call heaven. He left all that. He didn't consider equality with God a thing to be held on to. He emptied himself. He took on the form of a servant. He came to this earth for who? For others. He humbled himself, verse 8, and he became obedient. Obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. You see, verse 3 and 4 lay out some very specific instructions. Don't you be selfish. Don't you be conceited. You look out for others and consider others more significant than yourselves. Now, verse 4 makes it clear that you have needs, your family has needs, your marriage has needs, your children have needs, so you can't neglect those things and be pleasing to God. No, sir. But what you do is, while you're looking and while you're serving the needs you have, you've constantly got an eye out for others. What needs do they have? What can I do to bless their life? Maybe it's a physical need that you have opportunity to respond to. Maybe it's a psychological need that they just need somebody. And so while you may not be trained to offer counsel in mental disorders or challenges or struggles, what you can do is you can sit and listen. You got to be looking for other people if you're going to do that. And maybe there's a root need, a real need deep down. And what you're seeing on the outside is something much deeper on the inside. The only way you're going to see that is to be looking to others, considering others important, more important than yourselves. And this doesn't come naturally. No, this comes by me adopting the mind of Christ, who did the unthinkable for you and I, who gave up everything for you and I, who decided to be a servant for you and I, who humbled himself in obedience for you and I. All the while considering you more important than himself. Did you hear what Ryan read a few moments ago in 1 John chapter 3? 1 John chapter 3 and verse 16 almost sounds like John 3:16. I don't know if you've noticed that. By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to listen to the plea in verse 16. We ought to lay down our lives. I'll take out the word brethren and just say for one another. As a family of God's people, as brothers and sisters, as brethren in Christ, we ought to lay down our lives for one another. Wow. I don't usually have a $20 bill in my pocket, but I'm telling you, I got one tonight. If you need it, if you'll get out of my hair and let me go home and rest, I will give you that $20 bill. Please take it and just get out of my way so I can go home and rest. Isn't that easy? Isn't that easy? It's not too easy for me because I don't normally have it. But I'm telling you tonight, I got it. So you got a need? Let's make it happen and let me go to where I go on Sunday nights, and that's my chair. You see, if the need gets much deeper than that, then it involves me to get involved. It involves me to be intentional. It involves me to interact. It involves me to communicate and have this open line of communication wherein you and I can share needs with one another. It opens up vulnerability. It opens up transparency. It opens up humanity for me to be able to say to you, I'm not perfect. And for you to be able to say the same to me. That's hard. That's challenging. For you to admit to me that you have imperfections, and therefore, because of those imperfections, you have needs. Be they physical because of some choices you've made that weren't good, be they psychological because you've allowed yourself to think a certain way, or whatever the real root need is. Are we going to spend the time, take the time, use the time to go there? And the answer by and large is no. I walked by on Sunday morning, and I noticed you from a distance, and you're kind of standing over there in the corner. So I can tell you're not having a good Sunday morning. So I walk over to you and I say, how are you doing today? Oh, I'm doing great. And isn't it amazing how quickly you get better when somebody comes and asks you? You're not doing well. Say you're not doing well. And if you don't want to know, don't ask. Well, we've got to get a vision for the family here that looks like 1 John 3 and verse 16, where I am willing to lay down my life, not for my wife, although that's given, not for my children, although that's given, not for my parents, although that's given, but for my brothers and sisters. Wow. When you want to talk about needs, it gets real deep real quick, doesn't it? You see, feelings are one thing. So how are you feeling? Well, I'm feeling this way. Well, you shouldn't feel that way, but okay, you are. You know, we just keep all that kind of surface level. Now we get into needs, and now it may cost, it may hurt, it may take, it may require, and you may end up sacrificing for me. Will you? Jesus did for us, didn't he? But if anyone, verse 17, has this world's needs and sees a brother, sister, a family member in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Ryan ended on verse 18, little children. It sounds real good to say, hey, what do you need? What can I do? What can I do for you? And you're almost just dumbfounded when somebody answers, aren't you? It's like, well, you know, since you asked. Well, no, wait a minute. I didn't really mean it. It was just sounded good, right? Now, you may have never done that, but I have. I hadn't stopped somebody, but I've thought it, right? What can I do for you? What need do you have? And it sounds real good, and it makes me feel real good, and I almost get to check off a box religiously, you know. Man, I offered my services, and they didn't want them, so moving on. And if we're not careful, that's it, right? Because when somebody really starts asking for our action, does our vision go that far? Does what we will do or how we will respond? You see, verse 18 says in those very loving and endurement terms, little children, John talking to the church here, God's children, don't just be about word and talk, but be about action, be about doing. Be about whatever it requires of me. That's what I'm going to be willing to do. Love not in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. And so how do we do that? Well, it's not easy. We've got to do some of those things we've already mentioned, in that we've got to open up the lines of communication. We've got to be able to say what's on our heart. We've got to be able to share those needs. How are we going to do that? Well, we've got to develop a relationship in which we can, and where there is open communication, and where we can tear down some walls. And we've all got them. I let you into my house. I let you into my living room. I let you into my bedroom occasionally, but I don't want you in my closet. And that's how we live, ain't it? I have walls up. So you only get so far. And if our relationship is not open, and if our communication's not open, you may not get past the living room, right? You may be a living room person, and there's where the wall comes up. How do we get to a point to where as a family we don't have any walls? I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know that the more intentional we are on trying to tear those walls down, the more questions that we ask from a genuine heart to tell people, you know, I'm just going to be honest with you for my life. You know what I think people think when I ask them, is there anything I can do? I really think that what goes through your mind is this. He's the preacher and he has to ask that question. And you know what? That's kind of the truth. If I'm just being honest with myself, that's kind of the truth. So I need to change that. I need to work on that. I need to figure out how to tear those walls down, because I'm trying to convince myself that that ain't the case when I really think it is. So how in the world would you ever believe anything different? When I ask, what can I do, or is there anything I can do? Let me tell you what to listen for. Listen for what they don't say. Listen for what they don't say. Because I'm telling you, what they're not saying is a whole lot more than what they are saying. When's the last time you showed up to fill a need for somebody unasked? Those don't go unnoticed. And they don't go unforgotten. That person will go to their grave remembering that one. And you may do 4,200 others, but they'll remember that one. Why? Because you were listening to what they were not saying. Be intentional. Be purposeful. Keep the lines of communication open. Build the relationships that can go deep. And whatever you do, don't lose. Look at chapter 4 and verse 9. 1 John 4 and verse 9. In this the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent His only Son into the world that we might live through Him. I don't care what you have to give up tonight. It will not compare to what God gave up for you and for me. And this is love, verse 11. Not that we have loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son to be a propitiation for our sins. God loved you before you were lovable. God sent His Son to die for me before I ever cared that He died for me. God saw a need that I had, and I didn't even know how to ask for the fulfillment of the need that I had. But God saw it. He responded to it. He did whatever was necessary. And in this case, it's quite a bit necessary. And so as I think about our vision for others' needs, the goal of all of this is for you and I to be unified, for you and I to be growing, for you and I to be stronger in the Lord this week than we were last week. That's the goal of it all. And the more you can encourage me and the more I can encourage you, the stronger we can be together and the closer we can be to one another and the more difficult we can make it for Satan to get in. Now, that's what the vision's all about. About us loving God to the point that we show it so much by our love for one another, following the example that He's already given us. And so tonight, as we close with this invitation song, we're always asking what needs are out there, right? I hope that question has more meaning, and I hope it has more emphasis for all of us moving forward. Tonight, I'm not asking what can I do for you. I'm asking what can the Lord do for you. Because truly, ultimately, He's the supply of it all. And so tonight, if there's a need that you have that needs to be made public between you and the Lord, between you and His church, we offer you His invitation as together we stand and sing.